Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Kim Strassel. I'm here with Kate Batchelder-Odell and Bill McGurn talking about Trump's arraignment today. Bill, I agree with Kate that I think that there's going to be a lot of challenging in court by the Trump team. And what I wonder, though, is if before we even get to the question of jurors, if you're not going to ask for the Trump team to call on the judge to dismiss the case on the grounds that these are not credible charges. I wonder what you think about that idea, especially a little bit more about this judge. Trump has come out and blasted this particular judge, Judge Juan Mercham, made in part because Judge Mercham presided over two separate criminal tax fraud cases involving Trump's real estate firm and his former CFO. And, in one case, Mercham actually cited corporate greed and said if it had been up to him, he would have imposed an even stiffer sentence. And Trump has come out and said that this is biases the judge against him. And nonetheless, I have to imagine one of the first things they'll do is ask that judge to dismiss the charges. Is Donald Trump making things easier on himself by blasting this judge who his team has to go in front of? What do we think that the likelihood is that the judge will listen to that and that that's a possibility?
No, I don't think it's ever wise to challenge a judge, even if the judge has a problem. I think Trump's view is going to go badly for him anyway. The judge is not going to be sympathetic, so he might as well get some political capital. I noticed Trump's lawyer has been far more conciliatory to the judge. That said, I think it's undoubtedly true that for a judge to throw out these charges, which look to me flimsy and really an abuse of prosecutorial discretion, would take an immense courage. They'd be reviled on the left and so forth. So it's the kind of courage we really haven't seen all too much from the bench these days. So I would be very surprised if they were thrown out. I would be very pleased for the country if they were thrown out, but I don't think that's going to happen. And that's a problem with these kind of charges. No matter how flimsy or what a case, they still go through. And if you're convicted, you can get a sentence. So even if it's ridiculous and not well-founded and unprecedented, they still are a threat. So I would like to see the judge do it. I don't think they will.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, Bill, which is something else Donald Trump has been publicly bringing to attention and complaining about. He's been talking about the venue, talking about how Manhattan is such an overwhelmingly Democratic jurisdiction, warning that voters on a jury there are likely to be uniformly opposed to him. He recently suggested things should be moved to Staten Island. That can be quite a complicated process. I don't see that happening either. But I, too, would love to see this judge, I think, throw this out, even though I agree with you. I think it's unlikely. Let's just turn briefly to some of the political reaction, in particular, more recently from the rival presidential Republican field. We had talked last week a little bit about the initial reaction to this, which was pretty much every Republican candidate or would-be candidate from Ron DeSantis to Nikki Haley came out and blasted Alvin Bragg. This weekend, we got a more nuanced view. Asa Hutchinson, who is a former federal prosecutor himself, the former Arkansas governor, he announced on Sunday that he is going to formally get into the race soon in an interview with Jonathan Karl on ABC's This Week. Let's listen to him say that.
When I spoke to you earlier this year, you said you were thinking about running for president. Have you made a decision? Are you running?
I have made a decision. And my decision is I'm going to run for president of the United States. While the formal announcement will be later in April in Bentonville, I wanted to make clear that to you, Jonathan, I am going to be running. And the reason, as I've traveled the country for 6 months, I hear people talk about the leadership of our country, and I'm convinced that people want leaders that appeal to the best of America and not simply appeal to our worst instincts.
Hutchinson has positioned himself for a long time as more in the moderate wing of the Republican Party. He has been very critical of Trump over the years. He is not necessarily sided with Alvin Bragg, but interestingly, he called on Trump to withdraw as part of that interview. He made a couple of arguments. He argued that Trump ought to withdraw because the office of the presidency is such an important and demanding role that this is too big of a sideshow for Trump to bring along to that question. He also argued that Trump ought to withdraw to simply help himself because he ought to be putting all of his efforts right now into his own defense. Now, I would bet everything that I have in the bank, and admittedly, that's a pretty small amount, certainly under FDI and C insurance coverage, but Trump is not going to take that advice. But an interesting, different way to go about this, Kate. What do you think about his answer there?
Well, Kim, I think it's pretty safe to say that Trump is not going to follow that directive. In case there was any doubt about what Trump thinks about this, his legal troubles and what he plans to do with them, his fundraising group has already sent out an email with a new item you can purchase. It's a t-shirt that says "not guilty" on it. And he obviously intends to use this to brandish his ability to win the Republican nomination. We don't know what the political consequences of this prosecution will be. And I think Alvin Bragg has started a political wildfire, and you don't always know where they end up. I think it's very plausible that you have a scenario where maybe this does help Trump in the Republican primary, but it hurts him considerably in the general election. I mean, we've talked about this many times before, but Democrats have tried to get Trump in various ways, whether impeachment, whether through special prosecutors. But the way to defeat him, if they really wanted to do so, would be the ballot box, as they succeeded in doing in 2020. So I think what we'll see here is Trump will continue to use this aggrievement to continue to propel his campaign to re-win the presidency. I have some skepticism, Kim, about Vivek Ramaswamy, and has suggested perhaps that he would pardon Trump if he were in office. My skepticism comes with prejudging a case like that, though I certainly agree it would be a tonic for national politics to end the obsession with Trump, which I think if you look at it, you can plausibly say that some on the left want to continue because they think he's easier to defeat than some of his Republican opponents. So I certainly would favor a swift end to this saga that I think American voters are tired of.
Yeah, Bill, let's talk about that just a little bit because, I mean, you have Hutchinson out here now, and he's going to take a little bit different tack, clearly. He's not necessarily going to beat up on Alvin Bragg. It sounded there as though his position going forward is going to be to claim that Trump is simply too big of a problem to have in here, that he's brought this on himself. He ought to get out of the race and let everybody else get on with it. Vivek Ramaswamy, as Kate was mentioning, is instead, I think, trying to maybe neutralize this issue by saying, okay, if you elect me president, I will make sure that I X out this miscarriage of judgment. The play here seems to be to give Trump voters the confidence that if they decided not to vote for Trump and voted for him instead, that they could still feel good that someone had Trump's back. Now, I agree with Kate that I don't know if that's even something that you can do legally. There's some questions about whether or not the authority to get rid of these charges, which seem to be tangentially related to federal charges, if there's the authority of a future president to do that. But either way, what do you make of these diverging political strategies? How should the rest of the Republican field handle this giant moment that Alvin Bragg is now creating for the party?
Well, it's a mess. And it's a mess that was designed to be put in the Republican lap by the Democrats. The issue now, what we're talking about, we're not talking about Ukraine. We're not talking about spending under Biden. We're not talking about the border, tax rates, so forth. We're talking about Donald Trump. And I think most of them will pick a version of saying what Alvin Bragg did was objectively very bad for the Republic, and we'll fight it to the extent we can and hope that they can then move on. I mean, the problem the other Republicans have is that Trump supporters, what they like about the guy is that he fights, and that's what they really admire. And they see that a lot of people are fighting him. What they hate is when Republicans seem to side with Democrats and progressives that go after our people, our issues, and so forth, and surrender. So I don't think anyone's going to surrender. I think they're going to take a principled stand on Mr. Bragg and his bogus charges, and then they're going to want to move away and move to other issues where they think they offer a superior product than Donald Trump, and they think it will appeal to his voters. So we'll see. Also in the back of my mind, I keep thinking there's much of a hullabaloo about this, but it's going to look minor if there are charges coming from Georgia about election interference there and from the special prosecutor about Mar-a-Lago and so forth and interference. I think those will escalate it far beyond what we see today.
Yeah, unfortunately so, in terms of the state of the nation. I agree with that, Bill. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Kate. We thank our listeners, and we remind you that we are here every weekday. We'll be back tomorrow. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button.